The Wiggles are an Australian children's music group that started in 1991. The original 4 members were Greg, Murray, Anthony, and Jeff. But over the years, more supporting characters have joined the party, and many performers have gotten to wear the famous skivvies. Whether you like the Wiggles or your name is Geek Forever, you can't deny their legacy, creating memories for multiple generations of kids, including me. However, not all of these memories are good. Some have been through unintentional creepy imagery that's traumatized kids for years. Most people would point to the puppets, so much so that they got their own FNAF fan game. However, my mind goes to something else. Something much creepier.
So this is what we look like in Jeff's dreams.
In 2003, Space Dancing was released in Australia as the Wiggles' 14th film. Also, I'm going to be saying film, even though these are 40-minute videos and the Wiggles have technically only had one official film. It'll just make things easier, trust me. They had done 3D animated music videos previously, like Jimmy the Elf and Caveland, with animation somehow even more cursed than Space Dancing. But this was their first fully animated film. For a story about the Wiggles exploring space, animation was the right call, because it would have taken a lot of work to portray it in live action using the Wiggles' usual style from 20 years ago. That being said, the animation doesn't hold up at all today, or even for 2003. For context, this was released the same year as Finding Nemo. This movie. This video will be split into different sections, talking about each step of the animation process. This isn't going to go over story or the songs in a lot of detail. If you want that, check out the Cartoon Koalas review. This is more of a technical analysis. Now, with introductions done, let's dive into the first section. The models.
Come on.
The models in Space Dancing are half the reason for a lot of the movie's jankiness. It was animated by a studio called Plastic Wax, an animation studio in Sydney who'd later work on Dragon Ball Battle Hour, Mortal Kombat 1, and even Epic Mickey Rebrushed. They've definitely come a long way since making this. They used a software called 3ds Max, which is used by a lot of film studios nowadays alongside ones like Maya and Unreal Engine. It was quite limiting back in 2003, leading to Space Dancing's models being a bit low poly, in particular our 5 leading humans. I went for so long thinking that they didn't have rigs on their eyeballs because of how often they just stare out into space and turn their whole body to change directions, like they were wearing Batman's cowl. I noticed it looking very closely at Greg in this shot, so they do have eye rigs, but they just don't use them as much, leading to some very cursed results. Also, speaking of Greg, his eyebrows that are somehow thicker than mine, combined with his default smile, lead to some of the scariest faces in the film. In fact, anytime the Wiggles go into their default face poses, it's creepy. Not a normal idol pose like you'd expect. It's these wide-eyed grins with every possible tooth showing, and this happens across the whole film. Even when they're on Gloom World, Captain Feathersword doesn't seem to have this issue. It's just the 4 Wiggles, especially Greg and Anthony. Now, the animal characters are interesting. If anything, they were a big missed opportunity. In live action, Dorothy, Wags, and Henry are portrayed by people in costumes. They can't move their eyes or mouths, and they convey emotion through their body language and voice acting. Even in 2024, this is still the case. But even though Space Dancing is animated, they apply the same restrictions to these 3 characters. They could have had lip syncing and exaggerated expressions. If anything, their animation is even more stiff than the humans, which is bad when that was their main way of communicating without facial expressions. Pasquale can have an animated mouth. What's your excuse, Wags? Speaking of Pasquale, I should talk about the new characters too. Half the characters they meet in space are also humans.
Okay.
But they're not all modelled with the same anatomy the Wiggles have, besides King Mondo. The travelling hippies look alright. I'm surprised they have this much detail in their outfit textures, given they're only in 2 shots. King Mondo doesn't look as creepy as the Wiggles, but he does often stare out into space. Also, shout out to his crowd moving at 5 frames a second. Quality animation right there. Pasquale is modelled pretty well for a talking dog. The teeny weenies hide their eyes behind hats and fringes, which is weird given they spend all their time looking upwards. It adds a bit of mystery to them, I'll give the film that. The males get repeated multiple times and also have some of the most intense jawlines I've seen in a kids film. None of these new characters look like they belong in space. If they were going to have human anatomy, they could have at least had weird coloured skin or markings on their bodies, which would have been an easy adjustment in the texture. and that's what makes the two alien species we do see stand out more. The Z-Zap's designs are pretty cute, although they do get copied and pasted a lot. At least Zonky gets a captain's hat and yellow belt, but doesn't appear again after the opening song. Not sure where he went. Same goes for this robot assistant. Where did he take that baby? It actually would have been funny to have them both stuck on the ship as the Wiggles steal it, and they can't communicate with each other at first. But yeah, cute designs. I'm also a fan of the Gloomies designs. The way their skin sags and the blue colour palette really adds to their sad demeanour. Their pupil textures have a lot of detail, which is really cool, and the leader actually has a unique design. I wonder if he stole his jewellery from other people who crash landed. In general, Gloomwood is quite dark, with the people who land there never being able to leave, and I'm gonna assume they mutated into a Gloomy since they say they're as gloomy as them and we don't see anyone else other than Gloomies on this planet. A fate worse than death in my opinion. Although, it is weird that they stay the same and still get called Gloomies when the planet's restored. They could have become bright orange and called themselves the Tooties. Or they get really pissed and call themselves the Doomies. I'm just kidding, but that would have been a fun idea to have them change colour based on their emotions like O does in Home. The models for the environments and props are alright. Nothing too special, but nothing terrible other than the low quality textures that pop up sometimes. I found the characters to be more interesting to talk about, and we're not even done with them yet. Because the models are just the first step. They need to be able to move and dance around, which... oh boy, there's a lot to say about how space dancing handles that aspect.
Wiggly animation, everybody! Let's go!
The other half of the movie's jankiness comes from the animation applied to the models. Now, the Wiggles actually released a behind-the-scenes video breaking down the animation process in a simple way that kids can follow, and it's still mostly accurate for animation today, with a few steps lacking detail such as layout and compositing. It's a great introduction for little artists such as 3-year-old me. I was 3 when this came out? God, I feel like a fossil. Anyways, a lot of the animation was done with motion capture, which is basically people doing the actions while wearing a suit that translates their movements to the 3D model. They don't say this in the behind the scenes video, but it is in the end credits, and I mean, come on, it's pretty obvious. There's not a lot of smoothing between the animation keyframes, resulting in some jerky movements. They'll shake their heads around way too much, almost like they're a bobblehead.
Also, I'm not sure if it was polished much afterwards, given how many errors make it into the final film.
I should stop making fun of errors, given I've done worse in my animation career. Another annoying aspect of the animation is how much it repeats shots. All 4 of the songs, with singing, I'm not counting the Irish jig, have repeated choreography and repeated shots like the Gloomies watching dancing Gloomies away, or these shots of the ship passing planets and going home. The choreography is a different case. Even if the Wiggles repeated choreography in the live action films, they'd at least show different camera angles, maybe highlighting a certain dancer or doing a big pan around the set. This could have easily been achieved in animation, but I guess it wasn't in the budget to render multiple camera angles of the same shot. But because they don't do that, it can make song sequences feel dragged out. Dance Your Gloomies Away slaps, but seeing this shot get repeated 8 times makes me wanna... And I thought the Chipmunks were bad at reusing animation in PNGs. If they weren't going to animate additional choreography or change the camera angles, they should have cut shorter versions of the song for the film and kept longer versions on the soundtrack. A lot of music-centered shows do that, like Glee. Also, it's funny how one of the lowest points in both these franchises were when puppets were brought in. I just thought that was a funny coincidence, but anyway, back to the animation. Overall, Space Dancing's animation definitely needed more time to polish up the motion capture and needed to cut down on the repetition. This is stuff everyone brings up when mentioning Space Dancing, because it's the film's most glaring issue. Now, I want to talk about other aspects of the animation, whether they be part of the process or, in our next section's case, directly affects the direction the animation team takes. Voice acting is a critical part of the animation process. Their performance in the booth directly affects how the animation team approaches the characters, especially with the animal ones. Since she wasn't going to have an animated face and her movements are as stiff as a brick, Dorothy had to be carried by her voice acting, and thankfully Jacqueline Field did a great job.
Wiggles, I'm a little frightened.
She had voiced Dorothy in a few specials, so she had quite a bit of experience going into space dancing. I don't have any comments for Wags and Henry. Wags doesn't talk this time, and Henry's only in it for a minute just saying, "Something weird is happening! Look at this!" over and over. I will say I prefer Jeff voicing him over Paul Paddock, but that's just my opinion. Speaking of which, these 5 were the ones that needed to excel in the voice acting department since they're the leads and move the story forward. Paul Paddock as Captain Feathersword is great. His loud pirate voice is a great fit for animation, and he gives a lot of energy into his performance.
It was the sound of a doggy laughing.
In live action, Jeff was often the most shy and softly spoken of the Wiggles, but in space dancing, he's got a good sense of confidence, likely because of all the years he spent voicing Henry prior to this. He also does the voiceovers for a lot of the behind-the-scenes videos, including the space dancing animation one I keep referencing. So yeah, Jeff knows what he's doing in the booth.
Wow, this is great! Look, comfy seats!
The other 3 Wiggles didn't have as much voice acting practice, so it was interesting listening to their performances. I mean, some of the deliveries are amazing.
Yeah, it nearly made me forget we're billions of kilometres from home on a strange planet in a spaceship which is on autopilot and running out of fuel.
Yeah.
That one gets me every time. But most of the time, they're alright. Not much different than when they speak in live action. There wasn't a sense of nervousness in their voices, which makes sense because they're basically playing the same characters, the Wiggles, but just now having to do it with only their voices. While they didn't do any more animated films after Space Dancing, the Wiggles didn't stop voice acting, and it was nice to hear the subtle improvements in the Wiggles radio show and cameos like the one Anthony had in Bluey. If they continued to practice, they could pull off some serious roles. Greg has a deep register that would work wonders for a horror movie villain. You guys are probably starting to pick up which Wiggle is my favourite.
I declared myself as female Greg. Feel free to add that to your Chi Does Stuff wikis.
It's not like these 4 only have experience playing these skivvy-wearing goofballs. Space dancing continues the trend of every minor character being played by the Wiggles themselves.
Thank you very much. Your beautiful spaceship.
Smooth ride.
Zipper, zooper, zooper, zipper, zooper, zika, zika.
Wooshka Galaxy!
No, I'm not joking about that last one. It's literally in the credits. That's the behind-the-scenes video I want to see. So the voice acting ranges from alright to pretty crazy, which is a good palette for the animation team to use. They definitely take advantage of the louder voices like Captain Feathersword and pair it with some wild movements. Often there's times where the models jump around when the voices don't support it. That's less the fault of the actors and more of the janky motion capture. It makes any subtle moments like Greg comforting Dorothy a bit off-putting, despite both voice actors nailing it. In the end, all the voice actors did a great job translating their delightful fun personalities in live action to the animation medium. It's a great positive in Space Dancing's favour, which is unfortunately not the case for our next section.
What's this button for?
Captain, what have you done?
Now, I've been a professional lighting artist for over 2 years, having my hand in a few shows and 2 feature films. So I have a few issues with Space Dance's lighting, and some might border on nitpicking, but fudge it. We'll start with the one that bugs me the most, the spaceship interior. It's a flat, yellow lit room with no other sources of colour and light to bounce off the characters. But also there's shots of shadows of the characters on the characters. Like they all have a rim light behind them, but without the actual light around them and no source of where that light would be coming from. It's not always consistent between shots either. At times, like they had completely different colour grades applied in compositing. There is one shot I actually really like from the set. This one of Anthony looking out towards Gloomworld. The blue hues and reflections of the stars on the glass contrasted with the warm ship interior lighting in the background. I wish they played with more stuff like this throughout the film, especially once we got to the other planets. Many of them have these issues with continuity and a general flat look across them all. The shots of Pasquale look great, with the cool rim lighting around her right contrast with the warmer lighting around her left, and there's a good amount of shadows and contrast. But then we cut back to the main gang and it's like someone cranked the exposure on a key light straight in their faces. King Mondo's stage is my favourite lighting in the film. Good amounts of shadows on top of contrast between warm and cool lights that aren't overexposed. Stage lights lead their way to a lot of creativity, as opposed to earlier sets like Outside Wiggle House, where they probably just added a HDRI and called it a day. But the thing is, the rest of the planets could have had elements like this. Teeny Weeny doesn't have much on it that could project lighting, but it has to have some kind of sun, given the warm lighting and these obvious floor shadows. We never see it in the background while they're there, so I'm thinking this is another untouched HDRI. Gloomworld is basically the same. Sometimes it's flat and cooler, which adds to the gloomy vibe, but other times there's shots where they've got a warm sunlight on them, which doesn't stay consistent across the scene. As soon as happiness is restored to the planet, so does the overexposed warm lighting, although at least this time we see the sun that's causing it. There's a lot to be desired with the lighting on these external locations. The fact that the entire film only had 3 lighting artists gives me secondhand anxiety. They would have had massive workloads between them, so they probably didn't have time to create more complex setups and maintain continuity. I'd love to see the concept art for Space Dancing to see if the lighting team was rushed or if these were always the ideas. Either case makes a good way into our last section, which to me is the one that's going to hurt the most to talk about.
Is there much up there?
Get up, mate! I guess not.
The saddest thing to me is how incredible Space Dancing had the potential to be. Imagine how wacky the Wiggles world is, then times it by 2 because it's now animated and doesn't have the restrictions we have in real life, and then times it by 2 again because we're now in space! There's a lot of opportunities for crazy adventures while also being educational. Think of that upside down planet they fly past. I'm sorry, the upside down world this way turn. It could have been a world where people had to walk on their hands or have constantly changing gravity like in Mario Kart 8. Think of the kinds of musical numbers you could do with that idea, like dancing on the ceiling but with crazier choreography and a colourful light show happening in the background. Or if they needed to keep the budget low, they could have incorporated the street sign gags from the TV series, but as an alien society. But all we see in Space Dancing is a planet that's basically Vegas, an empty moon with tiny people on it, and a planet that predicted Twitter.
They came to visit us, and now they are as gloomy as us.
Oh, and the Elvis planet, because the Wiggles love referencing Elvis any way they can.
Lord have mercy.
And somehow the Wiggles can breathe on all these planets without a spacesuit? Not the best idea to put into kids' heads. I don't know, guys. It's just sad to think about what this could have been with more time, money, and imagination.
Why don't you get out and have an adventure? I think I just did.
Space Dancing ended up being the only animated film the Wiggles did. There were 2D music videos sprinkled throughout the following films and TV series, but they also stopped after a while. It seems Space Dancing was just a one-off experiment as opposed to a potential new type of wiggly fun. Why is that? Well, 3D animation was getting a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive to produce. Meanwhile, the Wiggles have always been a live-action band. Whether it be through recorded films or live performances, the band is at its best when interacting with children and sharing that face-to-face connection. Also, their films, when they rarely had a plot, were more down to earth, like being stranded on a beach or operating their own TV studio. Unless they want to go to the city of Atlantis or something, I wouldn't see a reason for them to base another adventure in animation over live action. Especially since around the Sam era, green screen backgrounds became much more common, so if they wanted to go to a fantasy land, they could. In fact, last week, as of when I'm writing this, they did an entire space-themed episode of Wiggle and Learn, entirely using the gang green screen onto 2D backgrounds. It's much cheaper for them to do this way, and they can maintain that face-to-face connection with kids. So yeah, I understand why the Wiggles never tried anything like this again. But I think that's something that makes Space Dancing special compared to the other films in the Wiggles discography. Even if it feels kinda jank and CGI Greg will haunt my nightmares, Space Dancing is a one-of-a-kind animated adventure that's truly out of this world. I hope you guys have enjoyed this retrospective. If you want to see more reviews like this, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.